Hey, we're here today to talk about taking control of your headless CMS using Contenta. As Jem was mentioning, I'm Mateu. I live in Mallorca, which is a little island. And I work for a company called Lullabot, and it's a Drupal development and consultancy firm. And we do Drupal projects, but not only that, we also do Node.js development and pure JavaScript apps and all that. I go by EOIPSA pretty much everywhere, in Twitter, in GitHub, in Drupal.org. It's a terrible username because it goes with a 0. It's hard to pronounce, it's hard to spell, but hopefully you can get it right. As Jem was also mentioning, I am involved in the Drupal community. I am the API First initiative co-lead, and that means that we work in trying to make Drupal more efficient and more friendly to develop HTTP APIs. And as part of that, I developed a suite of modules that we've been putting inside of Contenta, which is a headless version of Drupal. So before we get into the headless stuff, a CMS traditionally has been seen as a web application that you use to configure in an administration zone or a back office. You configure your site and your content model, and as a result, you end up having a website, right? So that's what traditional CMSs do. However, with the explosion of devices and the different places where people want to consume content, this has been kind of getting less and less useful because projects are no longer only about websites, but also about having a website, an iOS application, an Android application, maybe put something on the Roku, in Apple TV, in an Apple TV, and your smartwatch, and even in your smart oven. So how you do that is, instead of having this CMS that you configure in the administration part of the CMS, and then you produce a website, you produce a set of HTTP APIs, and with these APIs, you feed these different applications and these different devices. So the goal of headless CMSs is to be a way to manage your content, which is what CMS is for. Actually, it stands for Content Management System, and be able to deliver this into an omni-channel. As I said, Contenta just replaces the rendering part of Drupal and keeps the administration part. And this makes sense to me because Drupal is one of the most important CMSs in the ecosphere of the technology, and Contenta just adds some modules to turn your content model into APIs that you can query and that you can get information out and that you can put information in via these different devices. So in reality, we're not doing anything new. Don't try to read this. This is only to exemplify that many, many other CMSs are out there, right? It's not very disruptive concept that we've came out with. Headless CMSs are a thing, and initially what I wanted to be presenting today was a comparison of the different headless CMSs and what they do and how they do it and what are the pros and cons of each one of those. But then I started contacting some of the companies that run these headless CMSs, and they wouldn't allow me to try them. So I couldn't. What I did instead was, well, can I do some research and see if anyone else was able to succeed at this? And I only found one. And to my relief, it had Contenta in it, and it was winning the comparison. And, well, that made me happy, for starters. But that kind of highlights that people are wanting to know how to choose, because there are like too many actors in there. And you can see, like, in columns, there are different CMSs, and in the rows, there are the different things that these people thought that we should be comparing. And admittedly, if I had to do this comparison, I may not use the same values that they did, because they were comparing features, and that is really where Contenta shines. So maybe if I had to do my comparison, I would use all the parameters, and who knows who would win in that case. In particular, Drupal, and this is a quote by Dries Beitert, the founder of Drupal, and he said that Drupal is for ambitious digital experiences, and Contenta is based off Drupal, so it's kind of the same applies, right? And by ambitious, I'm not exactly sure what he meant, but what resonated with me, it was that it was for projects that cannot be satisfied by a pre-canned solution, like cookie cutter site, or some of these solutions that apply to a generic use space. Instead, projects that are a good fit for Drupal need to be doing something special, something interesting, something that is not what everyone else is doing. And for that, Drupal is it's an amazing platform. So in reality, what I'm talking about here is that this is a simple story about open source, because if you can use one of those pre-canned solutions where you go there, you register, you give your credit card, and then you start using it, then that's fine. If you can do it, it's probably going to be more dedicated to your use case, it's going to be better optimized, and it's going to work well. But if you can't, it is very difficult in all these platforms to integrate your code, to do, okay, this is the special thing that I need to do. How do I inject this code into this software as a service CMS that I just paid, right? Not many of the Contenta alternatives allow you to run your custom code. And that is very important because you need to take control to make it do what you need it to do, right? Since Contenta is fully open source, it's GPL2, you just download it and do whatever you want to the code. You can just run it as is, you can enhance it, you can alter the code, and you can host it wherever you want. Even you can host it in a service provider that sells it back to you as a software as a service platform, if that is what you want. But having the ability to really own your platform, I think that is crucial for many projects. And honestly, at some point I was tempted to end the presentation here, because like this is a big takeaway. Like, you own your CMS. You have a very good CMS that can do, according to some person that did a comparison, that can do most of the things that people want, and it's for free, and you can download it and have the code available. But I guess that we want to talk a little bit more about all the things or the specific features that Contenta comes with. And I was thinking about this in the sense that since we are developers, we rely heavily on abstractions, and we do it at very different levels. So let me give an example. This is a simple function that you get, that you treat usually as a black box. You feed it a string that represents a record locator, and it spits out an HTTP message, right? And spits out a string. You don't ever even think on what's involved into making all this happen, because this has all been abstracted from you. You don't think how the DNS gets resolved, how this talks to the OS, how this even down the line, this gets turned into the network card into electric impulses that travel wherever, right? All that has been abstracted away from you. And that's how we build software. Otherwise, it would be impossible to build software because everything's so complicated. And Steve was just mentioning this. How did we get here? How did we advance so much? And it's through abstractions that we did this. A way to do abstractions is like this one, to create functions. Another layer on top of that would be like NPM, the Node.js package manager. It's a way to bundle programmatic libraries, like, for instance, an OAuth library, or I don't know, something that prints pretty colors on the console, or that does other stuff, right? On top of that, a layer above would be a level of abstraction, would be the features, like a migration system, or it could be multilingual. And those are the things that Drupal focuses on. And when you install Drupal modules, what you're installing are features for the end user or for the people administering the site. You may be thinking that I'm a developer and I can build all this, and honestly, that's true. Like someone built this to get started, right? So I guess that why abstractions are important is because of money, right? We all want to pay our bills, and everyone is here for the business or because they want to do cool stuff, right? And they don't want to be reinventing the wheel. And when you can reuse other people's abstractions, and if they are good abstractions and they don't leak implementation, etc., it is a really time saver. And that's good for you as a developer, for your clients, and it's good for everyone. So I don't doubt that you can build like pretty much everything from scratch, but you can save yourself some money by reusing what others did. The biggest feature that I want to highlight from Drupal and Contenta is that I really believe that is the best content modeling tool that's available. And Drupal has evolved through the years into taking a big stance at this and into specializing in highly structured content models and deeply relational content models. So there are different ways that you can describe the content of your digital project, right? If you have a magazine, for instance, you could write an article on how this particular band just signed a big contract with a record label that has its headquarters in Vienna, right? And you could have a big text box that says that and publish it and be done, and that would get the job done. However, whenever you come to this conference and that particular magazine wants to do something special for that event, they may want to pull up all of the bands that have current contract with a record label with its headquarters in Vienna and have like a nice interaction in a sidebar or whatever. If you have your content structured properly and you can describe the bands with its title, with relationship to its members, with relationships to record labels that they are currently working with, and those record labels have relationships to the location where they are, then you can query for this information and you can create these interactions. And where if you have to parse that big blob of text, that would be very impossible. And this idea of highly structured content models makes very happy to my content strategy friends. One of the problems that this whole flexibility that I was talking about, reusing abstractions with the Drupal modules, and bringing in different features is that it results in a sometimes clunky UI, because you have to accommodate, every single module has to accommodate with an unknown configuration of Drupal modules, right? So every single Drupal install and Contenta install is different because they will have different requirements, because they will have different modules. And the configuration screens need to show the different form elements, and they need to work together. And in order to do that, the UI needs to remain relatively simple, and that kind of scares people away. But if you can get past that, you will realize that it's the best in class in feature-wise. Some of the CMSs that I showed even struggle with multi-value fields, which is something that we solved, it feels like a long time ago. When you create a content type and you create a field, you can make it multi-value, meaning that you can have 1, 2, 3 values, or an unlimited number of values that depends on each content, like, for instance, tags, right? You can have 1, 3, or whatever number of tags. And those multi-value things also work in relationships, allowing you to do these deeply relational content models, many-to-many relationships, and many other features, like adding prefixes, a prefix to your field with a $sign, or a suffix with centimeters, or having dozens of field types that are specialized to do something well. Because in the end, what you want to do with the CMS is to describe the semantics behind your business. You want to create a content model that describes the business that you're into. And then, with that, create the interactions that the users need to. And with those field types that are out there in contributing modules, in core, and that you can create yourself, you can do very specialized things. Like, for instance, if you only have a text field and a number to create an address, you could kind of make it work, right? You put the name of the street, and then the number could go with the postal code. And that's what you have to do with some of the alternatives to Contenta. However, in Drupal, we have an address field that is smart, that when you select the country, it changes radically the form element for that, because addresses are completely different in different countries. There are weirdness in Brazilian municipalities that I bet that not many people here know about, that are fixed by using one of these. And this is what I mean by using an abstractions really saves time. And if you find out, again, that this is not enough for you, then you can just develop it yourself. And by developing it, you just implement a set of classes, and the system takes care of allowing this field type that you created. All the fields that are of that type can be made multi-value, can be queryable. Anything that you put in there can be searched in an easy manner and exposed through the APIs. So that is definitely the best strength of this setup. Just use the thousands of modules that are available to build your use case, and then if you don't happen to have what you are looking for exactly, just develop it yourself and integrate it with the rest of the system, and it works seamlessly. Since we're talking about CMSs, it makes sense about talking about the editorial experience, because in the end, many of the products that we build today are based on the content, and someone is creating the content, and we want to make the content creation experience as good as possible and get out of the way with the things that really are becoming a problem when you are a content editor. And I'm thinking about things like content moderation. Imagine that at least in the company where I work for, whenever we write an article, we have to have one of our coworkers to review it, and then it goes through one of our bosses that really knows grammar and all that stuff and reviews that. Some of the process could be that you have this first review with a coworker, and then it goes in parallel to an editor and to the legal department to make sure that you're not saying nothing that, legal department. And once those sign-offs are clear, then you're able to publish the content. So that's a good example of the nice editorial enhancements that you get for free when you use a system like this. Another one, and this is one of my favorite ones, because once in a while I have the temptation to start over, to throw everything away. I'm sure that most of you have that temptation at some point. And whenever I get to the part of writing my access management system and my user management for this CMS that I'm writing from scratch, I get discouraged and I say, no, I don't want to do this all from scratch again, because there's a lot to it and we don't realize. Many platforms encourage you to use external services like Auth0 to just offload this from the CMS and integrate with that. And I think that's great for some use cases. And if there is anything from Auth0 that you really value, there is an Auth0 Drupal module, so you could make it work in Contenta as well. But I think that having and being part of the handshake, as that slide was saying, is important because it empowers you to have a deeply integrated access system that goes beyond roles and permissions and static evaluation of what a user can do or cannot do. Right? I'm thinking about things that are running that are happening at runtime. Imagine that you're developing an intranet for a university, right? And a member of that university is assigned to different classes, and each class has a set of documents. So that member can access those documents based on belonging or not to a particular class. And if someone edits that member to belong to a different class, then the access to those documents should be lost, right? These kind of interactions are the ones that you want to keep around by being part of the handshake and to have your users in your service, because your users are a critical part of the application that you're building, probably. Something that you stumble upon first, right after evaluating what CMS you want to work with, is, well, how do I put all my clients' current content in this new system? Because chances are that in 2018, your client already has a legacy system that they want to migrate. And many of the alternatives rely on dumping a bunch of CSV files in a format that they define. And there is one that wants you to upload them to S3 and give them access to the S3 bucket and process them in batches, etc. So they get creative, but in the end, most of them, not all of them, rely on this CSV ingestion. That has limitations and that has drawbacks, especially when you're thinking about this deeply relational thing. A column in CSV, it's either processed or not. And if it's referencing something that has not yet been created, and that something references back to something, and you have circular dependencies, there are hard problems to be solved in there. The approach that the Drupal 8 took is to bring into Drupal core this migrate module that you only work on migration plugins, and you just connect to maybe that legacy Java, proprietary Java application was talking to a Postgres SQL database, and you connect to that database, open a connection to that, and open a connection to the new Drupal database, and you just migrate the content. And that has some added benefits, like, for instance, if a migration doesn't work first try, which doesn't, like, that's a fact, it doesn't work first try, then you can roll back the specific content on that part of the migration, meaning that you remove that content and the relationships, and you leave the site functioning as it was before. And also it empowers you to do things like continuous migrations, like people keep using the legacy system for a while because they want to do a soft launch, and you keep importing data while the Contenta site is already in production. While most of all of those allow you to put data in, surprisingly, not all of them allow you to take the data out, which is very concerning, because you should own your data. It's very important to me to know what these vendors can do to my data. And I guess that goes into the privacy thing, but it is very daunting when you have to read the legal agreements and the terms of service of some of the CMSs just to know what they can do with your data. All of the ones that I checked, they are good. Like, they don't do anything stuff, and they say that they won't do anything bad, right? But if you own your code, if you own your database, and you own your infrastructure, and everything is open source, and it's yours, then you don't have that problem, and you can migrate away of this system very easily if you need to. Another thing that is very hard to implement is multilingual APIs. So in the end, what Contenta spits out is a JSON API, and making it multilingual, it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of effort. Because multilingual is not as simple as it sounds. And I know that it already sounds complicated. But when you think about it, if you want to retrieve all the articles that are tagged by a certain tag in German, what do you do if the tag is not translated to German for some articles? Do you pull those up, or do you pull them anyways because it is actually the same concept, but it doesn't have the translation? And there are many other variants that you can configure, and Drupal comes with a very complete multilingual system that also works with revisions, like revisioning your content, having the different edits that you made in it with translations. That is something that you don't want to be in a place to develop yourself. This one is fun, because I'm sure that you have heard about the security issues that Drupal has had lately. Have you? Yeah, I think you have, right? And people usually get confused by how this works. If the software that you're using, you don't find that it has security issues, then that means that, one, they may not be checking. Maybe they are checking, but they're just not fixing it. Or maybe they fix it, but they don't do security releases. Or maybe they do security releases, but they don't do announcements. Or maybe they don't go off the board announcing and making sure that everyone knows that there was a security issue. Because in the end, if I don't find out about the security patches that I need to apply and my site is vulnerable, is what I care about. I don't care if Drupal is secure or not. I care about my sites. I care about my installations, right? So I want the security team to make sure that I know that I need to apply a security patch. And that is an outstanding job that they are doing. And it's an amazing group of people, mostly volunteers, and I don't think I've seen so much security in software in other open source platforms. And so, yeah, really impressed with the security. And it's taken very seriously. Like, it's fun when you go to Drupal conferences and you meet with someone that you know that that person is aware of a security issue that you are also part of, and you talk about it, but then you shush out when someone joins the conversation because nothing can be shared about it. So, so yeah, let's get into Contenta-specific stuff, because many of these features are Drupal-wide. However, when we turn the content into an API, we not only create JSON variants of our content model and spit them out, right? We do it in a way that allows us to do those interesting interactions that I was talking about earlier, and it allows you to create queries like this, like give me the cover image and the publication year of all of the albums of all of the bands that have at least a member that's younger than 35 and lives in Mallorca. And that is a complicated query for an API to run. This kind of reminds of GraphQL, maybe. This is based on a specification that's called JSON API, and on top of that, it's enhanced with another specification that we call fancy filters. And if you're interested in knowing more about JSON API, I think that there is another talk later today in this track that's about JSON API. But having the ability to ask the server for this data specifically is very powerful, because the server does not know anything about what the consumers will ask, because the server stays agnostic about the presentation, because iOS and Android may be similar, but may also be completely different, and the server needs to be able to serve both, right? And you cannot encode presentation logic in the server, and therefore what you do is basically you allow the consumers or the applications to select and get the data all the data that they want, and only the data that they want in a single request. And that's a very performant way to get all this. Another good thing about Contenta is that since we ship with a set of demo content and a demo content model, we can provide a set of consumers or a set of applications that integrate with that. What we provide is a demo with recipe data and to build a recipe magazine. And we have a collection of implementations of the application. So you can go and say, OK, I want to develop this new project with Angular. Then you go and check, and there is a project that shows you how to integrate Angular with Contenta. And you can get inspiration by that. Whenever you're stuck, you can go and check, oh, they did it this way. And that makes you productive. And that goes, again, into the idea that you want to save yourself some time and be more productive, so your clients are happier. We have a ton of integrations. I cannot claim credit of any of those because I'm a back-end person, very back-end person. But we have Angular, people that contributed Angular developments, Elm, Ember, Ionic, React, Vue, a chatbot. I think it was something developed in Alexa. So there are a lot of examples, and that's very important because when you're starting a new project, it can get daunting. And following that same idea, we ship with a collection of pointers to articles that come with your content installation. We call it the Knowledge Hub. And it's basically a hand-curated list of resources that we think they are interesting when you are in these kind of projects. And it's not only articles, it's also tutorials, video tutorials, and it's a very big list on the different topics that you want to, or that you will encounter. Because one of the features that Contenta provides is GraphQL, and there is a section in the Knowledge Hub on how to use GraphQL, or OAuth 2. The same goes for the different kind of design, API design strategies that you may follow. So that's another of the things that we provide with Contenta. And we could talk a lot about the different features or the different things that I left out. Like maybe any of these is like the critical decision factor for your project. Maybe the fact that it's free, it's the decision factor for your project. Or maybe the fact that you can find available talent, because this is based on a very successful project like Drupal. And there are a lot of companies and contractors, and you can find staff augmentation for your project very easily. And maybe the good thing is that there are companies that are specialized in hosting infrastructure for Drupal projects, etc. So there are many other things that I could not touch on today. And I wanted to end up with a sad note. And that is that many people, when they think about Drupal, they say, well, but it's PHP, it's slow, and it's a huge application, and it's slow, and all that. And I cannot really argue against that, because it is. However, in the Drupal 8 development cycle, a decision was made in order to enhance the performance of these projects, what we would do is to create a complex system that would add cacheability metadata to any response that we have. And that means that we can cache content for a long time. What this turns into is that in the end, PHP is not serving your requests, Redis is. And Redis is really fast. And I say Redis, but it could be Memcache, or it could be, because the cache backends are swappable. You can use your own. But the point is that it's not PHP serving your request. So in reality, it is very fast. And it's going to be very performant. So you end up having a really rich feature set with very high performance. And I think that that is really cool. It's really worth checking. And there is the thing about abstractions that makes all this possible. Right now, we are thinking about the next level of abstractions, and we want to not only abstract at the level of features, but at the level of architecture. And we started thinking about, well, many people require a Node.js application to do things like server-side rendering, right? And many people are writing proxies to Contenta, and Contenta just becomes a microservice, a content microservice, and they aggregate at this Node.js layer. They aggregate many other services that they get the data from, so what we are working currently is into providing a proxy, an auto-generated proxy for Contenta that knows how to discover all of the services. So it's zero configuration, and it's in a non-blocking I/O environment, so it's really fast. And the cool thing is that we can front it with this cache backend, so we can get all of the cacheability metadata goodness. We can cache for a very long time and invalidate very smart, like, for instance, when I was saying all of the all of the album covers for all of the members that are under 35. Well, if you edit a user and you change its age, then it invalidates the cache entry for that response, because suddenly that user may become eligible for that query, and the system is smart enough to say, that blob of text that I have there needs to be invalidated and regenerated in the next request. So we are working on this. We're trying to make this even more performant and to try to set the basis for the ecosystem to grow and to get the outlet for other abstractions to be plugged in there. And maybe the next step is have a generic way that you can do server-side rendering and just choose, oh, I'm using React, or I'm using this or that. And that's all. Ta-da!
Thanks, Mateu. Thanks, Mateu. That was really, really interesting. We have some questions in Slido. I also wanted to point out that the Drupal Austria community, along with the Open Minds Open Source Awards, which is another Austrian association, has a booth just around here behind the post office. Sort of not visible if you're just shooting through, but come and talk to nice Drupal people there. So, looking at the questions here and making a sort of a suggestion, the person who asked about Drupal get-in and security issues, I think Mateu covered Drupal security pretty well. Someone is asking, a lot of people want to know about Drupio themes and distributions. That's done by a company in Serbia. Is it you guys who are just sitting in the room who want to hear about yourselves? No? Do you know anything about Drupio?
I don't, but I guess I want to find out now.
All right, okay, good. We took care of that. Is the CMS Excel comparison sheet publicly available?
It is, and it's actually currently maintained by this person. This person is not affiliated with any of the CMSs that is comparing. I think I have a link in the slides that I will make available. If not, if you search for headless CMS comparison in Google, it turns up to be like the first or second result.
All right. That sounds like a smart search term. All right, can Drupal extensions be only developed in PHP?
They are only developed in PHP. There is no other way that you could integrate so deeply with the system without writing PHP code that runs into the same application.
The most popular question left is why Drupal as a backend. I felt that your explanation of semantic data and extensibility went a long way towards explaining that. If that's going to be our last question for the day, do people want to hear why use Drupal as a decoupled backend? Yes, no? Okay, he nodded, so we get that. Why Drupal as a backend?
Well, first of all, because that's what I felt comfortable working with. And I guess that's a very powerful reason. I also think that things that we didn't cover, like the most obvious is what we covered, right? The amazing feature set that you get for free by installing Drupal modules and all of that. But to me, the most impressive thing is that it's backed by a huge community. And it has a lot of people that can help you figure out the things that you don't know how to do by just joining the Drupal IRC or Drupal Slack nowadays. And also because if you run into a very tight deadline and you need to bring someone in to make that super important project work, you can hire people that understand that code base if you follow the best practices that the Drupal community recommends. So those are things, those are all things that help your project be more successful if you choose a technology like Drupal.
All right. So to get us out to lunch almost on time. I'd say that's it for the question. Can you demo Contenta for anyone who's interested in seeing it working?
We can, yeah, we can do. Actually, I recorded some videos in case I talked too fast.
Great. So if anybody wants to see a demo, come on up to the stage and figure out when and where you can do that with Mateu.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Or if you want Contenta stickers, you can also come up to stage.
And stickers and Drupal Austria books. Thank you so much.
Thank you.